First of all, what is the Attorney General's interest in an organization like Engage Now Africa?
Sure. The reason why the Utah Attorney General's office has such a great appreciation for what Engage Now Africa does is that Engage Now Africa helps address issues like global human trafficking, helping to eradicate it internationally so it doesn't come in domestically into our jurisdiction in the state of Utah. They also provide support. They also provide education to help people in our communities understand that this global epidemic of human trafficking exists not just in places like Africa or Thailand or the Philippines, but right here in our own communities. So they are a great partner of ours because together we can educate domestically and internationally and bring resources to investigations and prosecutions, passing better laws, and then the critical element, getting resources to victims or survivors to help in the healing process. So those are some of the ways that there's a great synergy between our office and the Utah Attorney General's office. That's why we have an interest and are such big fans of Engage Now Africa.
What are some of the issues that Utah in particular faces when it comes to human trafficking?
Wow. Well, human trafficking, again, takes form in all sorts of different manners. There's sex trafficking, labor trafficking, organ harvesting, illegal adoptions, militia who are impressing and recruiting little young boys and girls to serve for these warlords and terrorists. All of that stuff happens at some level in Utah. And again, there was an example here just a couple years ago where we had a large case of an international drug dealer who was also trafficking young boys, abusing them. And he had spent 15 years in a suburb of Salt Lake City perpetrating all sorts of atrocities and these heinous crimes, victimizing not only the children themselves, but their families. And again, that victimization goes far beyond the immediate trauma. As these young men have been liberated now, they're dealing for the rest of their lives with the pain and the suffering. On the positive side, so many of them, like other victims around the world that we worked with, have been able to channel that pain into very positive ways to bring their stories to light so that we can work here in Utah with partners nationally and internationally like Engage Now Africa to help eradicate once and for all trafficking in all of its forms. One thing too that I wanted to mention for sure about the mission of Engage Now Africa that aligns so much with our values here in Utah is that Engage Now Africa, in its efforts to end poverty in the subcontinent and all around Africa, they focus so much on empowering people through education, through job skills, so that they can become self-reliant and take care of themselves. And when they do that, they eliminate or alleviate a large target of human trafficking. Many of the victims come from demographics where they're struggling economically. And so they are willing to try almost anything. Unbeknownst to them, they're getting themselves involved in human trafficking. And so Engage Now Africa, I know, does a lot to help support victims of natural disasters. That is another area. I was just in Nigeria a couple weeks ago working on human trafficking initiatives, teaching prosecutors and investigators and sharing ideas and best practices on how to address these. 1 million children there have no parents because of the AIDS epidemic. They're orphans and no one wants them, and so they are ripe for human traffickers to come in, exploit them. Just in Nigeria alone, this year there are 50 or 60,000 women in Italy who went to go to work in Italy, never made it to where they're supposed to be working. They were captured by Nigerian organized crime mobs and sold as sex slaves. So again, this happens all over the world, in Africa, but also right here in Utah. And together we need to really amass our resources, because it's not a political issue. I like to say it's not a Democrat or Republican issue here in the States. It's a humanitarian issue that needs everyone's help. It affects everyone regardless of wealth or religious persuasion, rural or urban. It can happen anywhere, and it reaches out its very cold and indiscriminate hand to victimize people all over the earth. So whether they're American kids or kids across the world, they're our kids, and thank goodness for organizations like Engage Now Africa that will partner with us to help make the world a better place and lift victims out of those very dark, dark places.
Thank you. Now with issues like we have here domestically with very vulnerable populations like refugees or people that come over on student visas,
Sure.
who have been tricked into working off campus and then having their visa go out of status, or have been tricked into working which could compromise their asylum application. Are there special considerations so that they don't fear coming forward, where they're not just going to be deported because
Sure.
they fell into a situation like that?
That's a great question. And in our office, for instance, we have a very aggressive education campaign working with local stations, for instance, in the Latino community with Univision, Telemundo, doing interviews. It's why I hired a specialist who's a senior advisor to us from Mexico, who has political experience, law enforcement experience, to be able to go out into the community and let them know that if you come forward and help us attack this issue, you will not be deported. Nothing about your participation will be used against you. Now, I can't give them immunity per se for all the different circumstances that may arise in terms of other agencies, but in terms of dealing with us, we will never put them at risk. These confidential informants that come forward, had it not been for a very brave individual who was out of status, who came and gave us the information, we never would have arrested Victor Rax, that international trafficker. And so I give a lot of credit to him, and we've worked with him in the legal process to make sure that he was not prejudiced in any way, that his family was protected, not just from physical harm, but also legally. So yes, the answer is we do have programs, we do have U visas, we have other types of mechanisms that will help us deal with the immigrant community who is very vulnerable and they're very scared. And my words to them always are, again, you come forward, help us protect the community, and you will never, from my office at least, for the jurisdiction that I have, run into issues or problems. And we've tried to work with other agencies to make sure that as these folks come forward to help us in law enforcement, that they're not unintentionally making themselves targets for other agencies.